I've noticed this trend. If I talk to people from London, they're maybe the majority of people, if this topic comes up, they're always like, of course there's too many people, because in their day-to-day life, there's some type of cognitive bias, right? Because in
Yeah,
their own environment, I mean, you could make an argument that London is overpopulated. You can make an argument that Beijing or Tokyo or LA or New York, you could make an argument that makes more sense that these places are overpopulated. You look at the
I,
traffic, you look at rush hour. But then
I
if you
agree.
fly across the USA and you look down, the country is empty. I mean, you could fit the whole world in Texas.
Yeah, so it's at best it's vastly overly simplistic to say there's too many people. And your point on urbanization is right. So one of my own, this is a prediction, but I've seen it happening whereby even in communities or countries where the total population is shrinking, and population in Japan's been shrinking for 10 or more years, people still gravitate towards the urban areas. That will always be the case. In fact, I think more and more people will be attracted to more attractive, what I call magnet towns within a region. Or the one area where young people want to live, where there's still, a bank open if we need banks, or there's a car servicing station, etc. Whilst the other towns in that area may decay. Now, those are still going to be, urbanized areas. So if you're living in that bubble, you will never see the reality of what's happening, probably not very far away.
Yeah. And also, if you think of where these ideas come from, these are also the centers. These are the idea factories, right? This is where lots of academia is. This is where the media is. This is where lots of politics is taking place, and so on. So I think you get a heavy urban liberal skew when it comes to the narratives that are out there. Those are really the voices that you're hearing. I mean, the media centers in the UK, very obviously, it's London. In the US, it is primarily LA, New York, maybe some San Francisco, maybe some Chicago. So that sort of worldview gets put upon the entire country or upon the entire world. And I think sometimes people draw very flawed conclusions off that. I mean, you can see the same. I mean, I've seen people talking about how it's impossible, or, how difficult it is to, make a living if you're only, how hard it is to survive on $100,000 a year. And of course, this is coming. I've seen this on Twitter, right? And people are all agreeing. And then I'm looking at where they all live. It's San Francisco, LA, New York, whatever. And they're like, can the average American live on $100,000 a year? And anyone who's not from those spots is like, what are you talking about, right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
The idea you can't live on 100,000 a year it won't sound bonkers to someone in LA.
Yeah,
or someone in San Francisco, but it sounds completely insane to anyone else, anywhere else in the world.
I think the ideologists have fed on this. It's easy to present people who are living in cities, urban areas, as someone, I think it was Bjorn Lomborg, said recently at the event, like we seem to like living on top of each other. We seem to like cities. We do it, and therefore we will continue to do this. Urbanization is always going to be there, even through those times of population decline. So it's not. One of the comments I do get is, it's going to be great when there's so fewer people. Rush hour will be gone and everything will be so nice. We'll be able to stretch out for once. That's not going to happen. You're just going to have decaying communities, literally, with too much housing and often lonely older people living there, and the same urbanization issue. So it doesn't change that at all.
Yeah, absolutely. For the people who are surprised by the talk of underpopulation, or who hold the opposite position, can you explain what the potential problems are here? Because sometimes, even if people do accept the numbers and they can see the trends in demographic, either they think it's good or they're just blasé about it. They're not really thinking about what that means for the society, for the economy, for the nation and world as a whole. So can you explain what some of the potential threats and dangers are?
Yeah, gosh, and they're vast and they're quite scary. I'll put one on the table because I want to come back and talk about it if we can. War. I think there's going to be instabilities between nations that we haven't seen, or maybe we're starting to see currently. Clearly, we are. But the idea that these nations are going to shrink, and that there won't be agitations or distractions caused by leaders maybe deciding to look at a neighboring country as a way to kind of take attention away from internal problems. So that is a real threat to me. In fact, that was my first thought when I saw the countries that are currently going through population decline the most. And going back, a few decades to World War II, it's these fragment lines may develop again. I certainly hope not, but I want people to be open and aware that that's a possibility. So hopefully it doesn't happen. But if you look at the socio and economic issues around this, I mean, there's nothing that will not be impacted. I mean, literally, I can't imagine any aspect of our life now that will function the same with not just fewer people, but shrinking people. So the most obvious one is supporting our elderly. In the UK, I had statistics quite recently that it must be the same in many places, but 60% of total healthcare costs, NHS in the UK, go on the over 75s. Well, the over 75s aren't going anywhere fast, and that's a good thing. We all want to live longer. But as we have a shrinking worker base, though that shrinking worker base still has to support those 75-year-olds. And, it takes a long time for that to kind of work through the system. And where I think younger people sometimes may not quite fully understand that if birth rates stay the same, yes, there's going to be fewer of them, but there'll be fewer of the next generation too. So they're going to have the same problem as the current, elderly generation. So simply paying for pensions, often people again think state pensions, they're paid in all their working life, perhaps that money is for them when they retire. No, that money goes to pay current retirees. You're going to be dependent on the next generation of taxpayers to pay your pension. So healthcare, pensions, and then housing. There will be too many houses. It's already happening in many places across Europe and Japan, and in certain places in the US too. I've seen. I spent a lot of time in Detroit, Michigan. It's a great template. Different reasons the population fell from 2 million to about 700,000 there. And, the city ended up going bankrupt because it couldn't afford to maintain the streets, the housing, the services. And what I saw in my time there was this patchwork quilt of streets that would have, half the houses. Well, it was less than that, actually. It was a quarter, a third of the houses occupied, and the rest literally derelict, just decaying away. That brings crime, it brings vermin, it brings just not for a very happy place to want to be. So Detroit for me is a template as to how to imagine the future in all of these places. So that's partly economic. It's also social because, they're linked. Social care needs a tax base to be able to justify it. Now, for corporations, for companies, for employers, and therefore staff, you have a growth problem because I went to a business school. Every MBA teaches you about growth. It's the key to everything is finding growth markets, finding the right level of risk within that growth. You as a podcaster and a rapper, you're looking for growth in terms of audience numbers. Stabilization might be the same, but that's that starts to change the mindset. Should I invest in this next? I use the microphone or this whatever. Should I be traveling so much if the numbers are stabilizing compared to if they're growing? You see things start to shrink, and the mindset changes completely. You become completely risk averse. So the idea that companies are going to want to continually invent new products, to invest in research and development, to invest in new markets, to train younger staff necessarily rather than just retaining what they have. The dynamics are going to be very different there. I believe there's solutions to this. It's going to solution is not the right word. It simply will be the world will be different. And from a corporate point of view, it'll be a case of who can survive the longest. It literally will be a numbers game. If there's 10 cafes in the town this year, there's probably only going to be 9 next year. And maybe, 10 years from now, there'll be only 4 or 5, whatever the timeline is, of course. And do you invest to make your cafe the best cafe that people want to go to so you stay there longer, but you've spent a lot of money? They better come. If they don't, your competitor who is smarter. So the business dynamics are going to change. And then just for young people, I worry about communities. We've lost community now in so many of these places. There's such loneliness. Loneliness is going right through society. And in the documentary, I saw a tragedy of elderly community in Tokyo, with just so many people aging alone. But for young people too, there's a lot of loneliness in society. So it's hard for me to think of anything that benefits. Even the environment won't benefit for decades. Only 8% of consumption it goes to under 30s. So it would take decades to have any impact on consumption. So the idea that this is a positive thing, and if the environmental concerns are right, we need to fix that a lot quicker than the decades that population decline would take. It's a very inefficient way to handle that situation. So in all my time talking to people, I still haven't come up with anything positive here.